Good afternoon and welcome to the NCVO webinar on applying for the Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund. I'm Nick, the Networks and Engagement Manager here at NCVO, and today I'll be joined by my colleague Sam Mercadante, one of our Policy and Insight Managers, and Ruth Bamford, the Funding and Relationship Manager from the National Lottery Community Fund. Before we look at the agenda for the next hour, let's run through the housekeeping. So 2 points around accessibility. First, closed captions have been enabled and can appear on screen. To turn these on or off, you can click on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Secondly, the slides for today's event have just been shared in the chat as a PDF. So if it would help, you can download these to zoom in and out of the slides as we go along. The resources that we refer to are all hyperlinked within the slide deck, which were attached to the joining instructions sent to you yesterday. So hopefully these are also at the top of your inboxes. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will upload it to the NCVO YouTube channel, but everyone has joined in view only mode, so your cameras and microphones are both automatically turned off. We'll have time for Q&A a little later on, so if you have questions, please submit them by clicking on the Q&A icon in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to get through as many questions as possible in the time that we have, but apologies in advance if we aren't able to answer them all. And just a caveat around the Q&A, we probably won't be able to respond to really specific questions on individual applications, but we will be sharing the contact details for the Cost of Living Fund advice line, who will be able to answer specific queries related to your applications. And finally, we're not planning a break during the webinar, but if you need to step away from your computers for any reason, please feel free to do so. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sam to give some background to the government's announcement in the spring budget of the £76 million Cost of Living Fund. Sam's going to provide a quick overview of the role that NCVO played alongside our members and our partners to influence the government to support the voluntary sector through the cost of living crisis. We'll then be joined by Ruth, the Funding and Relationship Manager from the National Lottery Community Fund, who, to be fair, has a lion's share of the presenting this afternoon. So when Ruth joins us, she will cover what the fund is, who can apply, what can be funded, and importantly, what's excluded, key dates in the application process, and how to apply and the decision timelines. After we hear from Ruth, Sam will facilitate a Q&A, and then it will be back to me in the final 5 minutes where I will highlight some resources to support you in your applications to the fund or in response to future funding opportunities. So on that note, I'm pleased to hand over to get the webinar started properly to my colleague Sam.
Thanks so much, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Mercadante. I am in the policy team at NCVO, and I typically work on funding and finance policy, which over the past year and a half or so has meant that I am helping lead our work on the cost of living crisis. So we first flagged the impact of rising costs and the kind of potential impact on the sector to government in spring 2022. Russia had obviously invaded Ukraine, energy prices were rising, but other costs were rising too. And we began speaking to the government based on what we were hearing from NCVO's many thousands of members about the concerns that we had. We also worked very closely with other infrastructure bodies across the voluntary sector. So this was a huge effort, not just on NCVO's part, but on the part of AKIVO, Charity Finance Group, sister councils in the other nations, Action with Communities in Rural England, all kinds of organizations. I'm sorry for those I've left out. There were so many of us who were working on this because it was absolutely the top priority for the sector going into last summer, and has only become more so, as you all know, since then. So over that spring and summer, we started pulling together all of the evidence we had on the impact. And that was quite difficult because really what we were talking about was concerns. We were able to see what was coming, but it was very hard to evidence that. And our members did a fantastic job of feeding back to us, telling us about their concerns, telling us about what they were expecting to happen. And we were feeding all of that back to the government over the spring and the summer. And we increased our pressure that we were putting on government as well. So we wrote to ministers, we wrote at least one open letter to the government calling for immediate help for the voluntary sector, because the voluntary sector is supporting so many people who were for various reasons, really vulnerable to increasing prices. And that was obviously, organizations were seeing an increase in demand for their support and their services because people were feeling the impact of rising costs. At the same time as organizations' costs were going up themselves, people were feeling a bit less able to donate. And also the value of income was eroding because inflation was rising so quickly. So in autumn, we just kind of continued what we were doing. We kept up the pressure. We kept demonstrating the impact of rising costs on charities. And we made sure that whatever the government was doing to support businesses was also relevant to charities. So we were really pleased in the kind of mini budget, if you recall that the energy support that Liz Truss, who was then the Prime Minister, announced was explicitly available to charities as well. And we, just before Christmas, we responded to the review of that support that the government was doing. We kept up the pressure. We kept saying, whatever you do for businesses, it has to be available for charities as well. But charities also, we mostly can't absorb rising costs. We are, serving communities that, can't afford to pay for our services, but really rely on that support. And so we are different from businesses and we do need targeted support. And we were all incredibly just thrilled to see and hear in the spring budget, the Chancellor announce an additional 100 million in support specifically for the voluntary sector. How that has ended up breaking down has been about 75% has gone to the fund that we were discussing today, the Community Organizations Cost of Living Fund. And the rest of it is going into a fund to support energy efficiency that is in progress at the moment. And so we worked closely with the government, but also with those other infrastructure bodies over the summer to help shape this fund that we're talking about today. And we're doing the same with the Energy Efficiency Fund. And so what that means is really a lot of feeding back to government about what our members are experiencing, what the voluntary sector needs, what would serve us best, and really trying to convey to them how important it is to get that right. And so at the moment, that's where the focus of our work is on this funding, getting it out, making sure that organizations can access it. And we're also doing work as well on what we're calling contract uplift. So in simple terms, the value of grants and contracts haven't been keeping up with inflation for many, many years. It's a problem we've been hearing about from our membership for a long, long time. But obviously when inflation hits double digits, that makes that problem a lot worse. And so at the moment, we are gathering feedback from organizations. You don't have to be an NCVO member to fill out our survey. So I'm just going to pop the link to that in the chat. It closes on September 8th. And if you do receive grants or contract funding from public bodies, so this isn't about kind of trusts or foundations, please do fill that out. As we can see through securing this 100 million for the voluntary sector, the things you tell us really do make a difference. Government does hear them and does, your stories do help us to illustrate what is happening in the sector and what is needed. So thank you very much. And I will pass over to Ruth now.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to, I've just heard the reason why it's really important to be talking to this group, this audience today about the new Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund. And I'm still on a high after that music. I've never had a musical introduction, so I'm going to stick that with me. So just to brief introduction, although you've had a really strong introduction already, but the Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund is part of the government programme which was announced in the spring budget we've just heard. So this is government funding for which the National Lottery Community Fund is responsible for distributing the grants element of this. And I can answer the first question posed in the chat. If you can still apply for Community Organisation Cost of Living Fund if you are already in receipt of National Lottery funding. So moving on to look at the next slide. And what I want to do here is give a bit of an overview. So the funding is for organisations who are supporting people and communities under severe pressure because of the increased cost of living and who are providing critical services. And it's possible to apply for between £10,000 and £75,000. For any amounts under 10,000, we're suggesting people apply to our Awards for All programme rather than this one. And we're more likely to fund small and medium-sized frontline organisations who have an annual turnover of between £10,000 up to £1 million. Now, larger organisations can still apply as long as they can show that they're working closely and effectively with local communities, and in addition, are filling a gap in essential local services. We want to support a range of critical services that are reaching as many local communities and groups of people as possible. And this is going to be one of the things we're thinking about when we're assessing which applications to fund. Now, applications are already open. The portal opened on the 24th of July 23 and will be closing at noon on the 16th of October 23, very specifically noon on the 16th of October. And it's important to stress that all funding needs to be spent by the 31st of March 2024. So moving on to look at who can apply. Well, you can apply if you're one of the types of organisations that you can see on the screen there. And while you're digesting that, I'll just highlight some of the situations where we can't fund. So we can't fund organisations that have already applied for this funding. We can't fund statutory bodies, and those include town, parish and community councils. We can't fund schools, individuals or sole traders. And perhaps of more relevance to this audience, we can't fund an organisation that's applying on behalf of another or as part of a partnership. So the next slide looks at what we mean by critical services. And this is one of the key eligibility criteria. So in order to apply, your organisation needs to be already running a critical service in at least one of the following themes. And they are provision of food and emergency supplies. So that could be food banks, baby banks, provision of hot meals, clothes, toiletries, provision of emergency shelter, night shelter or other accommodation for people experiencing homelessness, provision of safe spaces, particularly in the area of domestic abuse services and some youth services, provision of warmth, provision of financial, and really when we say financial, we mean money advice and housing advice. And in addition to providing critical services in one of those themes, you will also need to be, or your organisation also needs to be facing both increased demand for those critical services and increased costs in delivering those critical services. Now, we're happy to fund standalone critical services, such as a debt advice service, or it might be that you're delivering several services that are delivered together within a one-stop shop type model. So it could be that it's a community hub that offers debt advice, hot meals and a warm space. And I'd emphasise that both of those situations are as equally as valid and equally as likely to get funding. So it's not a question that, the more services you tick, the more likely you are to get funding. That's not the case. We totally see providing one important critical service is, equally as valid. And the activities need to be directly supporting people on low incomes who are severely affected by increased living costs. Ideally, they should be targeted rather than general provision. And in addition, we can fund organisations to continue, expand or adapt existing services, but not to start a new service. This is not new project funding. This is to fill a specific short-term gap. We'll only fund organisations that are experiencing increased demand for critical services and increased costs in delivering them. We want to help organisations meet the needs of their communities whilst themselves staying financially stable. And if you do apply, we will be asking you to tell us about the increased demand for your critical services and the increased costs. And that increased demand could be both that you've got more people using your services, or it may be a variety of things. For instance, that you're still working with the same number of people, but the complexity of the help that they need has increased. So that means you need to be spending more time, that sort of thing. And as I say, the aim of the funding is to support organisations who are themselves supporting low-income households and individuals facing severe challenges due to the increased costs of living. I really cannot emphasise enough how important that these are the critical eligibility requirements, and it's really important that your application must demonstrate how you meet these points, because that's what we'll be assessing on. So moving on to look at what costs we can cover. So looking at the funding available, we can fund the increased cost to your existing services and for the costs linked to expanding or adapting your services. And these costs could include staff salaries, volunteer costs, service delivery, so the direct costs associated with delivering, expanding or adapting your services. To some extent, we can also fund some small-scale refurbishment that may be needed to deliver any expanded or adapted services that you're applying for. So sorts of things here might be that you need to install a partition in a community centre so that people who are accessing money advice can do so privately, or to upgrade part of a kitchen in order to provide meals. But any small-scale refurbishment needs to be fully complete and paid for by the 31st of March 2024. We may also be able to fund small-scale improvements to your systems and infrastructure that may be needed to deliver the expanded or adapted services. Perhaps for some training and development for staff and volunteers who are delivering the services you're applying for. And importantly, of course, we can also fund a share of your organisation's overheads that are needed to run the services that you're applying for. So that we're thinking there of the fixed costs around management, admin, support staff costs, rent and utilities. But there's more information about our full cost recovery process and guide is available on the programme website. So we've looked at what we can fund. Going on now to look at what we can't fund. So we can't fund critical services that are not experiencing either increased demand or increased costs. We can't fund brand new services. This is not for new projects. We can only fund existing adapted or expanded services. This is only for services that are being delivered in England. And we can't fund the larger building works or maintenance or any refurbishment work that is not going to be completed and paid for by the end of March next year. We can't pay for the purchase of buildings or land, or for campaigning, political or lobbying activities. And importantly, again for this audience, we can't fund or refund for where you may be giving cash direct to people experiencing hardship, but we can, and I think this has been a question already posed, we can cover the costs of food vouchers. That's perfectly eligible. So the next slide, we've identified earlier that there are two elements to this funding. Firstly, the costs linked to expanding or adapting your critical service. And secondly, the increased costs of delivering your existing critical service. And so for the time being, I want to look in a bit more detail at expanding or adapting costs. And just remember that this is about expanding or adapting existing services, not starting a new service. So here we can fund expanding or adapting your critical service costs, but only from the date that we get in touch with you to say you've been awarded funding. So if you put in an application and we awarded on the 1st of October, this part of the funding would cover you between the 1st of October 23 and the 31st of March 2024. And because of that, we're issuing a bit of a financial health warning. You shouldn't increase how much your organisation is spending in this area until we've been able to contact you or been able to offer you the funding, because we are expecting to be oversubscribed and not to be able to fund everybody who applies. So the next slide looks at this second element of the funding, which relates to the increased costs of delivering existing critical services. And here we can fund future activity up until the end of March 2024. And unusually, we can also fund a small element retrospectively, so that we can fund costs that you may have incurred between the 24th of July 23, which is the date the programme launched, and the date that we offer you the funding, which we anticipate to be around 12 weeks after you submit your application. But these costs can only be for running your existing critical services that you're applying for, and not for anything else. We do know it's slightly unusual to be funded, to have this element of retrospective costs in it. And again, just to emphasize, these retrospective costs can only be paid for certain things. They're only for the running of existing services. And these would be staff costs, existing volunteer costs for running the service, and a share of your overheads for the services that you're applying for. When you make your application, we will ask you to submit a budget table with your application, which has a monthly budget profile, so costs per month. And so from that, we can work out the retrospective costs from the 24th of July until the date that we award you funding. And it's not possible, you can't just apply for retrospective funding. And so moving on, hopefully this diagram on the slide there, the diagram is aiming to illustrate how these two elements work together. And these are for costs related to delivery of a critical service. So just to summarise, we can provide funding to cover the increased costs of delivering your existing critical services up until the end of March 24. And an element of these could be retrospective, i.e. the costs you've incurred between the 24th of July, when the programme launched, and the date we award you funding. And we can also fund costs associated with expanding or adapting your critical service, but only from the date we award you funding. We won't just fund retrospective costs. And any award is likely to be made up of a minimum of 2 payments, retrospective costs and then future costs. And then this slide looks at how to apply. So we are already experiencing and we're anticipating high demand for this funding. Applications will close at noon on the 16th of October. And as I said, we're anticipating that it's going to take around 12 weeks to get a decision from us, although that will be earlier if we, looking at your application, and it's clear your claim is not eligible. We're suggesting you don't increase how much your organisation is spending until we have been able to award you funding, because we're unlikely to be able to fund everyone who applies. And just to emphasise, you can only apply once to the Community Organisations Cost of Living Fund. So please, A, ensure you're applying for everything you need, and B, please do take the time to make sure that you meet the criteria and you're telling us which is your what critical service you're currently delivering, what the increased demand is, and what the increased costs are. And the sorts of information we'll need and the things to think about when you're putting your application in is, as I say, remember to demonstrate what your critical service is and what the increase in demand is and how the cost of delivery has increased. Talk about the relationships and links you already have in the community that will help you deliver the work. How your work is going to benefit low-income households. How you understand and work within what your local community needs. How is the community or local area involved in your work? and how are they involved in your organisation and have a say in how you work. And then one of the last slides is summary of what we've been talking, or what I've been talking about. So we can fund a contribution to your direct delivery costs from between the 24th of July to the 31st of March 24. We can fund costs to adapt or expand your service, but only from the date we award you funding. All funding needs to be spent by the 31st of March 2024. And you must be running a critical service in at least one of the following areas: provision of food, provision of emergency shelter, safe spaces, warmth, or financial money advice and housing advice. And in addition to that, you must have increased demand for your critical services and be facing increased costs in delivering those critical services. And then the last slide that you've got on the screen there really provides some information about how to contact the advice line if you have got specific questions during your application. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. So I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the Q&A while you've been talking. That is my job, so don't worry. But we do have a lot of questions from attendees. So I will, I'll go through the questions in the Q&A function first, because that is just much easier to keep track of. And then I will have a quick scroll through the chat and see if there are any more questions that we need to answer. So some of these I think will be quite straightforward. Some of them we might discuss a little bit more. So we have about 25 minutes for Q&A now. So firstly, can people apply? So you said you can't apply for funding that will then be given directly to, you know, people that you're working with, but can organizations apply for funding to supply vouchers, not just for food, but for kind of other essential items, or is that just food vouchers? Yes, so they can apply for vouchers for essential items.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then there are quite a lot of questions about what a critical service is. Particularly, there are a few questions about how this pertains to youth services. So I wonder if you could talk a little more specifically about that.
Not really more than I've said going through it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of real, like some of the real specifics that have been put in the Q&A, I would encourage people to get in touch with the advice line, because that is what it's there for. We're not going to be able to answer like organization specific application questions here. We want to make sure that the questions Ruth is answering are kind of as relevant to as many people as possible. On the point about youth services, I think you mentioned that some youth services might be eligible. Is there anything more you're able to say about that?
Yes, but sorry, going back a step, we're sure. Not. No, that's me. We haven't identified specific. DCMS have not specified particular client groups. It's more about the activities, that the form of service that's being provided. So there are no specific rules about, under 18, over 18. It's about the themes the critical services relate to the themes and the sorts of activity that's being delivered. So in terms of safe spaces, we're obviously thinking domestic violence, hate crime, and we are having some applications that what we would not consider safe space is where things like that where people are being brought together for connection, for social activities, which are incredibly important. Don't get me, I would just encompass this overall. These are, when we talk about critical service, this is as defined for this funding stream. I'm sure all the activities that this audience is delivering are really important and you would consider critical. So please, I don't want to offend anyone, but it's when we're talking about critical here, it's about as defined for the eligibility rules of this funding, and it is those 5 themes. So if the activity is around connection, social isolation and loneliness, I'm afraid that does not come under one of the themes here. So it's and in terms of safe space, it's that there's some element of specialization. It may be that as I say, hate crime, domestic violence, so that it could be there's the people involved, there are special referral routes for them, or that's really where we're going on that one.
Thanks.
Sorry, that was a little bit
no, that was really helpful. So we've got quite a few questions about the exclusion of partnerships from eligibility. So for example, if an organization is considering a joint application with another organization, not eligible.
No.
Okay.
Which I know is because quite a lot of our national lottery funding is very much around partnership work. This is very specific. I think hopefully it's become clear. This is short-term, filling a gap. If you're thinking more strategic, long-term funding with partnerships or brand new, please look at some of our other National Lottery Community Fund programs rather than this one.
Yeah. And in terms of services that are commissioned by, say, a local authority, would that be considered a partnership?
No, because that's a contractual relationship.
And would those types of services be eligible to apply for this kind of funding?
It depends if they fit the earlier criteria.
Yeah. Okay. So being a commission service doesn't automatically.
No, not necessarily.
Okay. Somebody has asked if they are funding the types of services that are eligible, but they're not delivering them themselves. Would they be eligible?
No, you need to be delivering. This is for frontline delivery organizations, largely small to medium sized. I did talk about the larger ones, but the aim really is small to medium frontline delivery organizations.
Okay. And what about services which are kind of at risk of closing, have had temporary funding to date? Assuming they meet the other eligibility criteria.
Yeah, if they meet the other criteria, absolutely. Yeah.
So somebody has asked about the issue of increased cost of delivery, and whether you could also see that you could kind of see the same impact in the loss of funding due to cost of living.
Yes.
Okay.
If it could be that your costs are increased, utilities, etc., through the cost of living yourself, or that you're in a different funding, because of the cost of living, someone who was funding you very recently hasn't been able to. Therefore, you've experienced. Because the increased cost to you then is you've got to cover that gap. That would be
exactly. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. So then we've got a question about, if you currently rely on volunteers to deliver something, but the service, would benefit from having a paid member of staff, perhaps due to increased demand, if they're applying to this fund, is that something the fund would cover?
If it meets the eligibility, it sounds like that would be a adapting or expanding element. And again, if what I've talked about applies to you, then have a go.
So hiring additional staff, assuming it meets the other criteria, is something that this fund can.
That could be an expanding or adapting current service. Yeah,
that's great. In terms of the application timeline and kind of fund dispersal, so if applications are going to be, will there be any point at which the fund is kind of fully subscribed And could that happen before the 16th of October?
We will not be closing early. I can give 100% categorical no.
Great. Okay. And then let's see. So in submitting a budget along with your application, would you want people to show like total increased running costs for the period or just the additional costs?
If people look at visit the program website, there's the budget table we ask you to complete. We want to know the breakdown of the funding you're looking for from us rather than the total project costs.
Okay, that's great. Let's see. So, and just to clarify, because we are talking about projects, but it is about existing services. It's not about kind of new projects. No. Okay. So in terms of going back to questions about commissioned services,
yeah.
You know, if a commissioner has kind of cut some funding to a service, but the service is otherwise eligible, how would that, you know, would that be potentially eligible for this funding?
Out of context, I don't think I can.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see. So to your point about, you know, you don't have to be offering all of these services, you know, that are eligible. You could just be offering one of them, and neither of those is going to be viewed more or less favorably.
Not at all. No.
Yeah. Could those services be provided by this is quite specific, but by a parochial church council?
They could. I think the question is, would they be eligible? It depends whether the organisation meets the eligibility criteria that we had on the earlier slide. Yeah. And I would please do double check, because the rules for this funding and the eligible organisation type is slightly different to our normal reach and community rules. Yeah. So it is worth double checking, because there could be a situation where you would qualify for reaching communities, but you don't for this funding. So yeah, do check.
Okay. Yeah, reading every word of what is on the website about this is really important. So somebody has asked if they apply, you know, on the last day, they apply before noon on October 16th. Are you saying that it's possible that they might not find out they've been awarded funding until mid-January, and then they have to spend it by the end of March?
Part of it, yes. It's theoretically possible, yes. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. There were a few questions about how emergency food is interpreted. So if you're kind of providing a hot meal and it's a regular thing and it's, you know, it's critical to the people who are coming, but it's not kind of in response to a crisis, how does that sit with this funding?
Well, the wording is providing food and emergency supplies rather than emergency food. You know, I think we would be food is, you know, to prevent emergencies. I'm not sure whether I'm getting the subtlety of that question, but it's, you know, but it's provision of food and emergency supplies. It doesn't have to be, you know, people do not need to be on starvation point. I'm not trying to be flippant. This is serious, you know, but it's not the point at which people need the food.
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, because I have not been kind of involved in delivering this funding, but it strikes me that kind of the provision of warmth is similar. You don't need to be at crisis point in order to seek warmth in a warm space, in order for that to be eligible for this funding. So someone else has asked, can one application cover two separate things that an organization is delivering, two services, two projects, if kind of assuming they're both eligible, or does it have to be focused? So I guess if you were providing three things that are
Yeah,
eligible.
yeah, no, you'd be going.
Okay. So in terms of adapting existing services, we've got a question about where the kind of boundary of that sits. So, you know, appreciating that funding cannot be used for a new service, but say, you know, I know my local food bank has started looking at how they can provide kind of signposting and advice.
Yeah.
And that's new for them, but it kind of sits alongside the core service they provide. Would that kind of thing be eligible?
Yeah, the first main eligibility is that you need to currently be providing an essential service, and then, you know, if for increased that demand you need to expand, or you need to be delivering it in a slightly different way in response to that demand, that's really what that expanding or adapting is for. Yeah, I think one of your earlier questions was, it might be increased staff, or it might be that you know, the delivery is a bit different. Yeah, both of those are fine.
We have, let's see. You've touched on this, but I wonder if there's anything more you're able to say about it. So given that this funding is only kind of plugging a gap, as you said, up until the 31st of March, are there any expectations around the sustainability of services kind of after that period of time?
It would be nice, but no, it's not a part of our, you know, as I say, this is about trying to sustain. This fund is to help sustain in the short term because of the you know, because of the increased cost of living, rather than beyond it. That's a different policy framework to look into.
Yeah.
Okay. So if part of that was, are you going to get a load of questions from us about your long-term sustainability in terms of this funding? No.
Okay, that is good to know. In terms of the eligibility criteria, we've had a couple questions about specifically advice around like energy bills and energy saving, and kind of that obviously being linked to the cost of living, but whether that would fall under the eligibility criteria.
We would have thought if you were providing money advice, housing advice, that would be part of the service there. And also, thank you for reminding me. One of the things I didn't say is when we were talking advice, I didn't specifically mention benefits advice. But of course, again, we understand that if you're providing good money advice, you're doing benefit, you need to be doing the income maximization, etc. So that would come under as well.
Okay, great. We have had a few questions about whether there is any benefit to getting your application in early, or you know, whether you might as well wait kind of until later.
Really? No. I mean, particularly if you are going for expanding or adapting your service elements, as I was saying, you can only have the money from the date we award you. So the sooner your application, the sooner you will know whether or not we've been able to award.
Yeah, great, thank you. Going back to the question about adaptation, if an organization has seen increased demand, which is obviously one of the eligibility criteria, and you know, their service is oversubscribed, if they were looking to, say, not expand that service in that area, but maybe bring that service to another area, is that a new project or is that expansion?
You mean, so if someone was working currently in a particular ward and the increased demand was in a neighbouring ward, so they wanted to start, I'd say that as long as it's the same service, that's an expansion. As long as they're not, you know, someone else isn't already doing it. I'm sure nobody, you know, there's too much work for anyone to be competing, but that, you know what I mean, that would be something.
Yeah. Okay. There have been a couple questions about whether there will be a need to demonstrate kind of proof of what the money is spent on, and questions
Yes.
about monitoring.
Yes. I haven't gone too much into finance element because at this stage it's about are people eligible. But no, at the point we're getting to assessment and coming back to people to say yes or no, you've been awarded, there will then be you will then be having much more contact with the person around the detail of the costs, because depending on when that is, it will be how much is retrospective and how much is for future costs. And for retrospective, we would be looking for invoices and proof of costs at that point. But we won't be asking for that at this point. Obviously,
Sure.
not spent it, but yeah.
That's helpful. And will there be any element of returning funding that isn't spent?
That is always, that's part of the terms and conditions. I suspect for this funding, the majority is going to be, for the point that someone else very sensibly made about it, it could be December, January before we're able to, I suspect largely it's going to be retrospective, but I can't, that is something that could be, but I suspect it's not going to be particularly relevant to this fund.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. So there's lots of questions about funding staff costs, and I think that would, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you would just, you'd need to be able to show that those are linked to the services that were explained as the eligibility criteria, and also linked to increased demand and increased costs.
But sorry, I haven't been following the detail of that, but certainly staff costs are what we're expecting to be the larger part of what we're funding, because of the very nature of
let's see. So, I've just lost this question. Okay, so there was a question about how to calculate and demonstrate increased costs, and whether there's kind of a specific time comparison. Is it month to month? Is it this month this year to this month last year? What should that look like?
We're very conscious that this funding covers a sector that has its own, within those themes, it is its very own business model, and so we're not, we can't really prescribe it. We very much recognize that you're the experts, you're delivering in your field of expertise, and so we want you to tell us about the increased demand for your particular service. You're the one that's, you're the ones that know it best and know what that increased demand is looking like on the ground. So we're being very clear that you need to demonstrate that to us, but it's for you to make that best case to us, because you understand your business best.
So it's not extremely prescriptive in terms of how you demonstrate the increased cost and increased demand.
No, we need to see it in context for your particular business and experience, really. I mean, it's relatively recent. It can't be pre-COVID, or it's got to be in the last maximum 12 months.
Okay. One more question about staff costs. So I know I gave the example of, like, you've only been providing a service with volunteers up till this point, you want to hire someone new, but if you've already got staff and you're maybe hiring a new member of staff, would you be applying just for that increase, the new member of staff's costs, or could you apply to kind of cover, a pay rise across your staff because of the increased cost of delivering those services? Where does that line fall in terms of covering staff costs?
I think there's two elements in there, and I'd refer the person either to the slides or the program. I know that we're throwing a lot at people, so I don't mean that.
Yeah.
But you need to think about what is it you're looking for, and then split that between what's the current delivery costs and what are the elements linked to the expanding or adapting the service. So if you've currently got a part-time member of staff, and because of the increased demand you want to make them full-time, then the additional half time would be under adapting and
Okay.
And the budget table does split them up. So there's a table for current delivery, and there's one for adapting, and you don't have to go for both. Just to make that really clear to people, it's absolutely fine just to go for currently delivery or a combination, or just for adapting and developing.
Okay. I'm just looking back through the questions, but I think pretty much everything in the Q&A can be answered, or is answered in the FAQs and the eligibility criteria on the National Lottery Community Funds website. I know Nick has put the slides in a few times in the chat. So all the links, the advice line, it's all in there. The budget template that Ruth is referring to, that's on the web page for this funding. Nick has shared that link. And
on that point, sorry, can I just, if anybody's previously downloaded the budget table, thinking about the application and hasn't actually done it yet, can I strongly suggest and please ask you to download it again, because we've changed it fairly recently. It was if you've already applied, it won't make any, do not worry, we will still it will not make a difference, but it will just make it easier for people going forwards, in that it used to be a Word document. It's now an Excel document with formula in, so it will automatically add up, and it just makes it specifically clear that we only want you to fill that budget template in for the costs you're looking for from us, not your total project costs.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Okay, I will thank you all for your questions. And I really do urge you to visit the fund's webpage on the National Lottery Community Funds website. There's a lot of information there. You can look through the whole application form. It has everything that you need. And if it doesn't, you can ring the advice line and they will talk through your specific questions with you. I will now hand back to Nick to wrap up today's session.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. And that was a very intense Q&A. I'm not sure that we've ever kind of covered quite so many questions during a webinar. And just for everyone who's going to join us online, there were 80 to 90 questions that came through. And I think, yeah, we managed to cover the vast majority. But as Sam said, as Ruth has said, there's heaps of information on the Cost of Community Fund website pages. There is the advice line. Do call that number. Do drop them an email. But in closing today's event, and before we run through some signposting, I'm just going to launch a 2-question snap poll just to get your initial thoughts on how you found today's webinar. If you can provide additional feedback, a short survey will appear in your browser when you leave this webinar. And for us, it would be great to hear about what was good, where we can make improvements, and what further guidance and support would be helpful from NCVO. So there's lots of information to share with you today. And if you need a recap on anything, this webinar will shortly be uploaded to the NCVO YouTube channel. Do just Google it. It'll be the first YouTube channel that does come up in your browser. And everything on this slide is hyperlinked. And this slide deck was sent to you yesterday in the One Day to Go email reminder and has been shared a couple of times in the chat as well. The most important resource on this slide is the guidance produced by the National Lottery Community Fund on applying to the Cost of Living Fund. But in addition to this, over on the NCVO website, you will find our guidance on applying for grants, our guidance on where to go for funding, advice and support, and our guidance on financial management. And we also run a couple of online training courses that might be of interest that run throughout the year, which include developing a fundraising strategy and writing successful bids. For all NCVO training, NCVO members receive a 30% discount on all of our training offers. And if you're not yet a member of NCVO, we would love to have you join our community of over 17,000 organisations, from the biggest How to Name charities to the smallest community groups. Our members really are at the heart of everything that we do, and we exist to make your lives that little bit easier so that you can focus on things that really matter and make the greatest impact to the communities that you serve. More information about becoming a member can be found on the NCVO website. So before we sign off, a special thanks to Ruth for talking us through the Cost of Living Fund, and to Sam for kind of facilitating that kind of epic Q&A that we've just been through. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us online this afternoon. On behalf of all of us at NCVO, we wish you the best of luck in your applications to the fund. And a final reminder, please put a couple of moments to share your feedback with us, which you can do as you leave today's webinar. But for now, enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.